I know this is the bit that we're all excited for, the questions. What we'll do is we'll have some roving mics floating around if you want to ask one. Introduce yourself, try and keep the preamble short, and I will kick things off. Critics have described this budget as mean and nasty. Some have been a little bit kinder and said it's difficult and tough. How would you describe the budget that you just handed down?
Well, I'd describe some critics as mean and nasty too. Put that to one side. Look, this is a budget that really recognises that we are looking after those in the community who continue to have long-term difficulties, and we have to recognise that the pandemic has left scarring in the community. Second thing we have to do is not lose the economic momentum that we've built up. So, as a government, we continue the hard work of growing the economy, investing in the infrastructure for the future. And the final thing the budget does is it makes sure that we pay off the COVID debt. So the investment in productive growth of the economy, that's one thing. And we can all have a debate about what constitutes appropriate levels of investment and appropriate debt levels. But the one thing we can't take for granted is the dead weight of spent investment protecting the community doesn't generate growth going forward. So we have to red circle that and get rid of it as quick as we can.
What do you make of some criticism that this budget is engaging in like class warfare or the politics of envy?
Well, you know, I've been Treasurer of the State for 9 years now, and I don't know that I've ever been accused of being a class warrior, but perhaps it's a title that just doesn't sit comfortably with me. The fact that as a government we care about those who need assistance and who are most vulnerable, well, I'm proud to say I'm happy to wear that tag of a government that cares about the welfare of the most vulnerable. Secondly, we do recognise that there has been economic winners out of the pandemic. I mean, metropolitan Melbourne rents, advertised rents have risen by 25% in the last 12 months. And 1 in 3 households are rental households. So some people are bearing a burden as a consequence and others are doing reasonably well out of the event. We know also that corporate profits are about 25% above where they were 3 years ago, right across the nation. Close to $1 trillion of profit has been made over the last 3 years. So I don't begrudge a profit. In fact, it's pretty hard to tax people if they don't make a profit. So please continue making profits where you can. But it's important that we all recognise that we have a collective responsibility to our welfare. So I believe this is a budget about fairness and making a contribution where we can.
I've got a question over here. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from.
Deborah Di Natale, CEO, Council to Homeless Persons. The first thing I'd like to say, Treasurer, is congratulations to you and your government for what is an outstanding commitment of $5.3 billion to the big housing build. At Council to Homeless Persons, we've often said we need 6,000 additional social housing dwellings in order to meet demand. So I'm keen to hear from you what the government's plan is post the big housing build.
Yeah, well, the big housing build was big. And I think it sort of shifted the dial in many ways. And importantly, I think as a government, we've got to recognise that we're going to have to keep the investment up in this area. Now, we haven't made any decisions about what and how, but the Premier has made it clear that we're doing work at the moment and we expect to be able to produce strategies around what we'll be doing in this area around about September at the latest. So it's really about making sure that we can continue the momentum that the big housing build has put in place, recognising that we have to continue to commit ourselves to facilitating a multifaceted approach towards housing, recognising that from all cohorts in that market, from the homeless, where we've put an enormous amount of investment over the last 3 years, and clearly we still need to do more, but looking at the fact that we don't have adequate means by which we facilitate more robust reflections of what a community should look like when we build housing. How do we reflect upon that, and how do we incentivise developers to be able to get us to where we need to go? So we don't have any announcements to make at the moment, but I think if you could take one thought away, we are a government that is committed to social justice and fairness, and housing is one area where I think it's starting to get away from the community, and it will speak volumes about where our priorities lie as a community if we don't take action to redress the increasingly inequitable nature of our housing supply.
So another one on table 4, I think. It's a great table.
Hello, Treasurer. Emma Greeny from Mental Health Victoria. Obviously, you referred earlier to the Early Intervention Investment Framework, and it's been a few years now that the state government has utilised that initiative in the budgets. I'd be keen to hear your reflections on whether this has shifted the approach that Victorian departments take to their bids and their investments, and whether it has resulted in an increase in, say, proposals in justice reinvestment or similar areas. Do you think it's having that desired effect on the way that our departments structure their bids?
That's a really good question, Emma, and it's, I've got to say it's taken a while for my office to get my social conscience in alignment with my fiscal responsibilities, but they've converted me, and there's nothing more excited about something than a new convert, and I believe that Early Intervention Investment Framework does open up enormous opportunities. It gets us to pick up that old adage of a stitch in time saves 9. That is, that if you identify a problem early, you don't have to deal with down the track acute presentations of the very same problem. So whether it be in our criminal justice system, avoiding people getting into the justice roundabout, or whether it's alcohol and drugs and early prevention of greater levels of addiction and harm. There are so many areas where we've seen if governments just thought a little bit beyond, I've got to throw money at the acute presentation, but I'm not prepared to avoid the acute presentations because it's not as urgent. So I'm trying to remember the number. I think it's about $675 million that we put in this budget for a variety of early intervention investment framework proposals. And what is really interesting about this is when we first started this about 3 years ago, we had to look long and hard, and we actually had to construct with the department and Treasury what we call the EIF proposals. What we've found in this budget is departments have finally twigged, hey, there's real money that we get out of this. Now, the way it works, of course, is we'll give you money early, but we'll factor out over the forward estimates and beyond a return to the state by reducing the spend on some of your acute services, because the theory goes, I give it to you early, you avoid those acute presentations down the track. And a lot of departments are getting very excited about this, and Treasury have massively got with the program. This is a world first in terms of the way that we as a government are budgeting. And I see great potential for it, and my hope is that I'll be able to extend it because if we can get agencies to know that you can come to Treasury and Treasury will work with you to get up an early intervention investment framework proposal. We're starting to adopt the strategy. We're from Treasury, we're here to help. We've got a way to go yet before we'll convince everybody, but this is really groundbreaking stuff, and a real credit to the people in Treasury who've been able to finally land this policy.
So one at number 9. Hi.
Thank you. Ben Vassallo, CEO at Youth Projects. Thank you, Treasurer. Good to see you. You acknowledge that we are currently experiencing quite a significant drop in unemployment. It's at the lowest rate it's been for quite some time. But when it comes to youth unemployment, the rate in Victoria is 2.5, 3, in some regions 4 times the adult rate. What is this government doing to invest in making sure that vulnerable young people get access to meaningful work and can sustain that meaningful work? And what does that mean for the funding over the forward forecast for Jobs Victoria?
Yeah, well, Jobs Victoria's been on an interesting journey, I think it's true to say. We invested something like $600 million in Jobs Victoria in November 2020. It was an enormous amount, and you probably have to go back to that time when we were seeing so many people lining out the front of Centrelink on the evening news. We thought we were going to be in a position where the entire economy was going to be disabled like nothing we'd seen since the Great Depression. Luckily, our greatest fears didn't realise, but as part of our jobs plan to create over 400,000 jobs over 4 years, we put a lot of effort into cranking up the capability and capacity of Jobs Victoria. The fact that our greatest fears did not realise for the community at large, I think was a good thing. But we've done an amazing work contributing to that jobs plan through Jobs Victoria. That's helped tens of thousands of Victorians find work. What we're doing, and of course with a community-wide rate under 4% now, I think the idea of a mass-produced Jobs Victoria is probably not required, but what is required is that we have to recognise that we will be making an ongoing and continuing investment in Jobs Victoria for those at risk and most vulnerable in the community. So we've made provision for that for Jobs Victoria, and I might also say that we've had some really useful conversations with the Commonwealth Government about these matters. I've spoken to Julian Hill about it. They're very excited about what's been going on with Jobs Victoria, the idea of bespoke support for those most vulnerable in the community. So I'm rather hoping that we can see that the groundbreaking work we've done in this space will be picked up by the Commonwealth in their next budget. I'm hoping that, and we'll be advocating for it, because we basically stepped into the breach when we didn't think a Commonwealth Government was really concerned about the sort of hardship community was going to face. Now we know that we've got a partner in the federal government, and we'll see what part of that work they want to take on.
Table 25.
Kathleen Maltzahn from Sexual Assault Services Victoria. Treasurer, given the pleasure from being a new convert, I've got another area you might want to be converted on. We think that you can make many parallels around investment and intervention around sexual assault. Obviously prevention and stopping it happening in the first place, but also fixing our court system so that when people are sexually assaulted, when we fail to prevent that, they get a good response, and when they seek services, they get a good response. The Law Reform Commission handed down at the instigation of your government, a very, very good report. So my question is, what's your thinking about investing in that report? And if I can be a little bit cheeky, the other question is, can we come and talk to you about it? Because we'd love to talk the economics of it as well as the community care side of it.
So the answer is, can you come and see me? Of course you can. I'm one of those politicians who likes to say my door is always open, and I try to at least sound convincing when I say it. But I generally do mean it. I've found that if you want to be a good minister, listen to people. And I've become very good at letting people down if I don't see that we've got a capability to necessarily accommodate the things that you want. But good ideas are something that governments have to be alive to. Otherwise, effectively, all you're doing is listening to yourself, and you marinate in your own ideology. So more than happy to catch up with you at some time. But on the issue of sexual assault, family violence more broadly, as you know, we've got 227 recommendations out of the Royal Commission into family violence. We've made some significant progress in investing in services around family violence, and I'm sorry if I equate them as both, because there were recommendations that went to both issues, sexual assault and family violence. But we are leading the nation in this area. It's why, of course, in the budget we put $3.8 billion over the last 9 years into this area, with another $117 million being added to ending family violence and sexual assault through crisis management support, and also behavioural change programs. And also there's specific support for Aboriginal frontline family violence services and those with complex needs. Having said that, yeah, we'd like to talk, see if there's anything more that you think we should be doing or could be doing.
Is there one down table 13?
Jane Dullard from Each Health and Support Services. Treasurer, there is overwhelming global evidence now that hospitals are dangerous places, and that most people, and particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, recover faster and better when they're cared for at home or close to home. This budget has put, I think, $320 million into the Health Infrastructure Development Fund and taken money out of the already very small Community Health Services budget. When will this government start to move in the other direction so that people can be cared for in the community and close to home?
Yeah, look, I think firstly, $320 million is in many ways acquitting what we said we would do in the budget, but there is a need for continuing work in this space, and I commit as a government that we recognise those obligations and those responsibilities. With regard to the issues of community health, we are making particular contributions as I work my way through my speaking notes.
Plenty of notes there, Treasurer.
I do, and I have a very shallow memory, but here we go. Regional community leadership investment is one of the areas where we see that there is an important opportunity to grow. Our regional health organisations in this year got essentially continuing funding, our biggest health pipeline in our history, and that $320 million for that infrastructure delivery fund, that'll undertake detailed design and planning work for 7 new and upgraded hospitals, including the 2 that we've mentioned in Wonthaggi and West Gippsland. The budget gives a boost to healthcare across the region with $20 million to support 25 priority primary care centres, 8 in regional Victoria. And we're also putting in $44 million to deliver 8 PET scanners right across the state. So on the community healthcare issue, we're not cutting community health services. Changes were made and they were announced last year in the budget to consolidate community health promotion into our local health, our local public health units. And that was aimed to publicly and actively promote healthy eating, active living and tobacco-related harm. We'll continue to work closely with the health services involved in the program to understand exactly how they implement any changes to their funding. But so far as we're concerned, we're not winding back that funding. We're just reflecting it in the way that we said we would in last year's budget.
It's table 18. Can you stand up as well, if that's okay? I forgot to tell you guys to stand up.
Hi, Treasurer. Michael Perusco from Berry Street. Just a couple of comments and then a question. So the first comment is I think the tax revenue measures in the budget were really responsible and fair, and I say that as a person who has a second home, so I got skin in the game. Second point was that you mentioned in your presentation the increase in the investment in care services. We've had discussions about that. You've had discussions with the sector over the last couple of years, and it's absolutely fantastic to see that level of investment. It means that all kids in residential care are going to get the therapeutic care that they need. So it's really going to change lives. And I think it's really fantastic that you listened to the sector and you made the investment. So thank you for that. Also appreciate your comments in relation to indexation. and the preparedness to look at the rate. We're all under severe cost pressures, and it's really important that we get to a point where we're funded fairly. Just interested, given that we're preparing our budgets at the moment, what is the time frame in terms of looking at that increase?
As soon as we can, quite frankly. I mean, I'd like to have discussions with the sector, and I want this to be a tripartite type arrangement. I want the relevant unions to have a say as well about what constitutes a fair jobs code, and whether or not we've provisioned adequately for this industry to make that commitment as well. So it's obviously going to be more than we've provisioned at the moment. I'd like to see exactly how far apart the CSOs and the unions are, to see if we can, and what their respective expectations of a jobs code looks like too, because it may well be that the expectations are too high in certain respects from the union movement, at least in the short term, for it to be achievable by some of the employers. So how do we go through a system that gets us to what are fair practices in this industry? So it'll take as long or as little as it's needed, but I would hope, given that these discussions have been going on for, I don't know, 12 months now, that we should be able to get to a point. And I understand that that means that the state is going to have to provision more for it. We put $15 million aside to assist those who want to do some of the leading and apply for a capacity to make the transition, but we recognise that there's going to be a need for some ongoing funding as a consequence of what a completed package looks like. Can't really put any dollars around that until I know exactly what the commitment to the code looks like, and whether or not we've got a tripartite agreement. That is, whether the unions see it as value, whether we as a government see it as value. But look, I don't have any great expectations that this should take too long. I would probably hope that we could knock it over inside 6 weeks.
Soon. Table number 13. Hello.
Hello, Treasurer. Trav McLeod, Executive Director of the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. Thank you for a comprehensive overview, and as Michael said, what you've just said about indexation, and congratulations in particular for the big investment into early childhood development, which has been done with other jurisdictions and now the Commonwealth. I wanted to come back to what you said about Jobs Victoria. Now, there's a huge focus federally on the Workforce Australia Employment Services System. There's the white paper, a desire for a much broader full employment target, which is terrific. And as you said, the 21-22 jobs plan did invest, $620 million into Jobs Victoria at the height of the pandemic. But do you worry that the dramatic downsizing of the Jobs Victoria presence is too abrupt and too fast? I think it's $25 million this year. There's an enormous amount of capability, talent, connections to employers, systems data about what works, that we know that Julian Hill's committee is looking very closely at a better way of delivering employment services. And we know that in this state there are still around 600,000 people that want to work or want to work more. Do you worry that Victoria might be disadvantaged in negotiations with the Commonwealth, which will take some time with the white paper and the review, without having that capability still on the ground to meet that moment?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, these are hard choices, there's no question about it, but in circumstances where, there was high watermark funding provided for what we thought would be, a very difficult employment situation that never really transpired, largely because the federal government, with all its shortcomings, I think JobKeeper did at least provide substantial insulation for many in the employment market that until that had been clarified, we didn't know where we were going to end up. But I think we can't, as a state government, pretend that we can do everything. We have to recognise that it's got to be a partnership with the Commonwealth. Certainly from my perspective, we're at a point now where female participation in the labour markets at an all-time high. We've got underemployment at a 20-year low in the labour market. So what continuing role do we see Jobs Victoria has in an ongoing sense? It's obviously dealing with disadvantage and making those investments. Could we have kept it going for another 12 months and then handed it over in complete form to the Commonwealth? I'm not sure that they wanted to take it in its complete form, so I think they too are focusing around how you better target this towards the disadvantaged groups. Now, we can have an argument about whether we've adequately provisioned for those disadvantaged groups, but there's a genuine effort on the government's part to make sure that we can keep the system whole in terms that we believe that the Commonwealth will be interested in acquiring it. Nobody wants to see a loss of skill or capability, but in circumstances where I do have to come down from a $49 billion expenditure over and above normal expenditure in the November 2020 budget and a $26 billion expenditure over and above normal in the May 21 budget, I had to basically bring the expenses into some order of repair, and I was comforted by the fact that the Commonwealth saw a role for itself and is working towards that. So we'd expect that come next budget, there'll be a federal budget, there'll be a capability for the Commonwealth to step in.
Table number 14 or 16.
Hi, Treasurer. Keir Patterson, CEO of Neighbourhood Houses Victoria. And your comments about indexation and helping us deal with input costs are really welcome. The other factor, though, is community need. And so in 2021, we were distributing a tonne a day of food relief through the 400 neighbourhood houses in Victoria. This year, that's increased to 9 tonnes a day. And so my question is, will you look at, so where there are ongoing funding programs, will you look at increases over and above indexation where you can demonstrate that there's an extreme community need?
Look, I think the best way to deal with those issues of peaks in demand, and I'm not going to pretend that we're perfect in being able to see where across the economy there are areas of growing demand where we think, given the phase down from the pandemic spend is needed to be maintained and in some circumstances extended. So we're always happy to have a conversation about those matters, whether you think we've adequately provisioned for it. And quite frankly, we'll listen if we think that there's going to be some hardship in the community as a consequence of choices that we've made that work against your organisation doing the vitally important work that you do. So happy to have a conversation, can't guarantee you an outcome, but the one thing I hope people in this industry understand is when we say we want to talk, we want a partnership, we mean that quite genuinely. And like if we have made an error, if we haven't picked up a trend that's working adverse to the interest of the community, well, we'll do what we can to rectify it.
Table 24.
Thanks, Treasurer. Derm Ryan from the Youth Affairs Council Victoria. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the Victorian Government for the investment that they've made in the response to the recent floods. And I also would acknowledge the investment that was made following the bushfires from 2019, 2020. I think we can all acknowledge that disasters are becoming both more severe and more frequent. The World Meteorological Office has just recommended that there's a 66% chance that we will cross 1.5 in the next 5 years. With all of this happening, when are we going to see proper investment in preparing for disasters in Victoria, particularly with young people, and how are we going to upskill them and get them ready for the disasters that we know are going to continue to come and be more severe? And particularly, how are we going to include them in decision making? And if your door is open, I would absolutely be very keen to come, not just myself, but some of the young people that we've been working with to sit down and talk about this issue with you.
No worries. So I'm going to have to issue a card with a number on it, and everybody's going to have to take a number and come and see me at some stage. Look, certainly on the issue of the flood damage and the costs that it has added to this year's budget, about $2 billion. And I accept that that's not just emergency support and remediation. It's about starting to think about what some of those communities will need in an ongoing sense. So it might well mean the need to construct appropriate levies to ensure that communities are better protected going forward into what will be an uncertain future. There is no doubt, as a government, we accept that climate change is real, and we also accept that governments have to do more than just talk about it. They have to take active steps to invest in a greater and more resilient response from governments at all levels when the inevitable consequences of climate change afflict us. So we are and we'll continue to look at what investments we can make. For example, with a pretty heavy heart, I've got to say, I announced the closure of the native forest industry. In doing that, I knew that the 22 timber towns across the state were going to be pretty existentially afflicted. But we are thinking about, well, what can we apply the employment opportunities in those areas? And most obvious one is forest management and how do we adequately provision for fire breaks? Do we have the adequate heavy material to manage the need for fire breaks being constructed and forests being managed in a long-term sense? So once again, another cost, and we've provisioned $200 million in this budget to do just that. On the issue of young people, look, I don't know about you, but when I talk to young people, I don't need to prepare them for the future or to impress upon them how substantial and real the challenge is. Young people lecture me, and probably with a fair degree of justification, that there is a generation, previous generations, including my own, haven't picked up on the messages that the planet's been sending us, and we're all going to pay a pretty dear price for it into the future. So how do we get young people prepared? I think it's recognising that they should understand that as a generation, they haven't been forgotten by those of us in power at the moment. We need to invest in the resilience of our economy and communities now, and we need to recognise that progress towards a low carbon emissions future is vitally important, and we have to move quickly.
I think that's time for questions. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. Emma's going to come up, but I'm going to sneak one in while she does. Should we be reading into the fact that the Premier came to budget lockup and spent some time with us journalists on Tuesday? Is there some sort of message in that?
The message is he's a much better salesperson than I am. But look, he raised the idea with me a few days before, and I said, this is fantastic. You're not throwing me to the press pack by myself. You're going to be there to support me. And look, he does a great job. If you look at somebody who appreciates the portfolio responsibilities and the complexity of what every minister does, but to have a Premier who actually understands the economics and the basic structure and philosophy of this budget, and who's been just an enormous support to me being able to put this together. Can I tell you, I'll tell you a story out of school. This has not been an easy budget to land, and there are a lot of people who have great expectations because my ministerial colleagues, my caucus colleagues, they have great plans and ambitions. And it can be quite difficult to tell them, well, we don't have the capacity at the moment and we have to get involved in the process of fiscal consolidation. And to have a Premier there backing you in while you're making those hard choices and decisions has been nothing short of amazing for me. So anytime he wants to come in and speak to people to tell them about the nature of our policy interventions in this budget, he'd be more than welcome.